The massive trading station Nexus Prime buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy conducted business. Tentacled Corthians haggled with crystal-bodied Zephyrite over shipping routes, while sleek Valorian merchants counted profits from their latest weapon sales. In the shadowy corners of the station's lower levels, information brokers whispered secrets that could topple governments. Nobody paid attention to the small human sitting alone at a grimy cantina table, nursing a glass of synthetic alcohol. Marcus Chen looked unremarkable by any galactic standard. Average height, brown hair going gray at the temples, wearing a faded jumpsuit that had seen better decades. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from too many years in space and too many disappointments. What the other patrons didn't know was that Marcus had earned his scars fighting in the Outer Rim conflicts, where human colonies had been brutally attacked by raiders. While the galaxy's major powers had dismissed these attacks as minor pirate activities, Marcus had seen the truth. The raids were coordinated, systematic, and growing bolder. A massive Thalorian enforcer, standing nearly 3 meters tall with armored hide and tusks like curved swords, shoved past Marcus's table without acknowledgement. The alien's contemptuous glance said everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. A young, weak species barely worth noticing. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago, making them cosmic children compared to civilizations that had ruled the stars for millennia. Marcus finished his drink and made his way to the station's central hub, where a crowd had gathered around the public announcement screens. The news anchor, a graceful Etherean with luminescent skin, spoke in the calm tones reserved for routine updates. The Galactic Council has received reports of increased raider activity in the Terminus sector, she announced. Military analysts believe these are isolated incidents involving desperate pirate factions. The Council has voted to maintain current patrol schedules, citing budget constraints and the low strategic value of the affected systems. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The Terminus sector contained dozens of human colonies, farming worlds that fed millions of people. But because humans were considered insignificant by galactic standards, their suffering barely registered as a footnote in council proceedings. A group of Valorian officers stood nearby, their sleek uniforms and superior expressions radiating arrogance. One of them, a tall female with silver skin and cold blue eyes, noticed Marcus listening. "Another human worried about the frontier troubles?" she asked with amusement. "Perhaps your species should have chosen safer worlds to colonize. The galaxy is dangerous for those too weak to defend themselves." Her companions laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Marcus said nothing, but his hands slowly clenched into fists. These same Valorians had refused to sell defensive weapons to human colonies, claiming humans lacked the sophistication to use them properly. The truth was simpler and more insulting. Nobody wanted to arm a species they saw as evolutionary dead ends. Humans were tolerated in galactic society as laborers and minor traders, but they held no real power or influence. When human worlds burned, the galaxy simply looked away. Marcus left the hub and walked toward the docking bay where his ship waited. The vessel looked as unremarkable as its owner, a modified cargo hauler called the Prometheus, painted in faded gray and scarred by micrometeorite impacts. Other ships in the bay gleamed with advanced technology and elegant designs that spoke of wealth and power. As he approached his ship, Marcus noticed a figure waiting in the shadows beside the cargo ramp. The being stepped forward, revealing itself as a Corthian information broker named Zilthak. The alien's tentacles writhed nervously as it spoke in accented standard. "Captain Chen," Zilthak said quietly, "I have information you might find interesting regarding the raids in the Terminus sector." Marcus stopped walking. "I'm listening." "The attacks are not random pirate actions as the Council believes," the Corthian continued. "My sources indicate coordination, planning, and resources far beyond what scattered raiders should possess. Someone is funding and directing these operations." "Who?" Zilthak's large eyes darted around the docking bay nervously. "That information comes at a price. 50,000 galactic credits." Marcus almost laughed. "I don't have that kind of money." "Try someone who does." "I have tried," Zilthak replied. The Valorians called it human paranoia. The Ethereans said it was beneath their notice. The Zephyrites claimed it was too risky to investigate. None of the major powers care enough about human colonies to spend serious money on intelligence. The words stung because they were true. Marcus had spent months trying to convince anyone, to take the threat seriously. Even human-controlled corporations had dismissed his concerns, more interested in quarterly profits than frontier security. "There's another option," Zilthak said carefully. "I could provide the information in exchange for future considerations. If you're planning what I think you're planning." Marcus studied the alien's face. Corthians were notorious for their ability to read people and situations. If Zilthak sensed something, it meant Marcus wasn't hiding his intentions as well as he'd hoped. "What makes you think I'm planning anything?" "Because you're Marcus Chen," the Corthian replied. "Hero of the Kepler station siege, the human who held off 3 raider assault ships with nothing but a mining laser and pure stubbornness. You didn't come to Nexus Prime for a vacation." Marcus felt a cold smile cross his face. The Kepler station incident had been classified by human authorities, who didn't want to admit that a single freight captain had accomplished what their military couldn't. But information brokers like Zilthak made their living knowing things others wanted hidden. "The data," Marcus said simply. Zilthak produced a small storage device, coordinates, shipping manifests, communication intercepts, and financial records. "Everything I've managed to gather about the raiders' true nature. Be careful, Captain. What you'll find there will change how you see this conflict." Marcus took the device and pocketed it. "And what makes you think I can do anything with this information that the major powers can't?" The Corthian's tentacles curled in what might have been amusement. "Because you're human," it said. "Your species has a disturbing tendency to do impossible things when properly motivated. The galaxy has forgotten that trait at its own peril." As Zilthak disappeared back into the station's crowds, Marcus boarded his ship and sealed the airlock. He settled into the pilot's seat and activated the storage device, watching as data flowed across his screens. What he saw made his blood run cold. The raids weren't random acts of piracy. They were a systematic campaign to test human defenses and response times. Someone was preparing for something much larger, and humanity was completely unaware of the danger approaching. Marcus spent 3 days analyzing the data from Zilthak, cross-referencing shipping routes, attack patterns, and financial records. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its scope and precision. The raiders weren't desperate pirates scraping together attacks for survival. They were a well-funded, professionally organized military force. The financial trails led back to shell companies and hidden accounts, but Marcus could see the pattern. Someone with enormous resources was bankrolling this operation, and they had been planning it for years. The attacks on human colonies weren't just testing defenses. They were mapping response times, studying human military capabilities, and identifying strategic weaknesses. What made it worse was the realization that humanity was completely isolated in facing this threat. The Galactic Council's dismissive attitude wasn't just arrogance. It was deliberate ignorance. The major powers had written off human space as insignificant, which meant they wouldn't notice or care until it was too late. Marcus set course for the Kepler system, where his old friend Admiral Sarah Rodriguez commanded the small human fleet tasked with protecting the frontier colonies. The journey through hyperspace gave him time to think about what he was about to do. Once he shared this information, there would be no going back. The Kepler system's defense platform challenged his approach, but they recognized the Prometheus and granted him passage. The human fleet here was pathetically small by galactic standards. 2 aging cruisers, 6 frigates, and a handful of patrol ships trying to protect dozens of worlds across a vast territory. Admiral Rodriguez met him in her Spartan office aboard the command ship Defiance. She looked older than Marcus remembered, her dark hair now streaked with silver and new lines around her eyes. The weight of trying to protect the impossible with inadequate resources showed in every line of her face. "Marcus," she said warmly, embracing her old friend. "I heard you were skulking around the Rim territories asking uncomfortable questions. Should I be worried?" Marcus handed her the data storage device. "You should be terrified," he said simply. Rodriguez loaded the data into her secure terminal and began reading. Marcus watched her expression change from curiosity to concern to outright alarm as she absorbed the implications. "This can't be right," she whispered. "The scale of this operation? Marcus, these financial records show funding equivalent to a major military campaign. And these attack patterns, they're not random raids. They're reconnaissance in force. Someone's coming for us, Sarah, someone big, well-funded, and patient. They've been studying us for years, learning our weaknesses, mapping our defenses. The question is who and when. Rodriguez stood and began pacing, her military mind already working through the implications. The Council needs to see this. If we can prove that there's a coordinated threat to galactic stability, they won't care. Marcus interrupted. I've tried. The major powers see us as insignificant. Even if they believe this data, they'd probably decide it's easier to let humanity get wiped out than to risk their own forces protecting us. Then what do you suggest we do? Our entire fleet couldn't stop a major military operation. We have 12 combat ships protecting 47 colonies across 6 systems. If someone launches a coordinated assault, we'll be overwhelmed in hours. Marcus pulled up a star chart on the terminal, highlighting human-controlled systems. What if we don't try to stop them? What if we let them think they've won? Rodriguez stared at him. Explain. Look at the pattern, Marcus said, tracing attack routes on the display. They're probing our outer defenses, testing response times, mapping fleet positions. They expect us to fight conventionally, ship to ship, fleet to fleet. They're preparing for a quick, decisive campaign that breaks our military and leaves our colonies defenseless. And we don't give them that fight. We evacuate the frontier colonies before they attack. Pull our entire population back to the core systems. Make it look like we're abandoning everything in panic. Let them occupy empty worlds while we prepare for the real battle. Rodriguez shook her head. Marcus, you're talking about abandoning millions of people's homes and livelihoods. And even if we could pull off that kind of evacuation without being detected, what then? They'll just follow us to the core systems. That's the idea, Marcus said with a cold smile. We draw them in, make them overconfident, let them spread their forces across dozens of conquered worlds. Then we hit them where they don't expect it. With what? Our 12 ships against their battle fleet? Marcus pulled up another set of files from the data storage. Remember the mining platforms in the asteroid fields? The cargo haulers that service the agricultural worlds? The civilian infrastructure they won't see as a threat. Rodriguez began to understand. You want to militarize our civilian fleet, not militarize, weaponize. Mining charges become torpedo warheads. Cargo haulers become suicide bombers. Asteroid mining platforms become hidden weapons depots. We turn our entire civilian infrastructure into a guerrilla warfare network. The casualties would be enormous. You're talking about turning farmers and miners into soldiers. I'm talking about survival, Marcus replied quietly, because the alternative is extinction. Look at these attack patterns, Sarah. This isn't about conquest or tribute. They're hitting food production facilities, water treatment plants, civilian population centers. This is genocide disguised as piracy. The weight of that word hung in the air between them. Rodriguez returned to her chair and stared at the data stream scrolling across her screen. The evidence was overwhelming once you knew what to look for. This was a systematic campaign to eliminate humanity as a species. Even if I agreed to this insane plan, she said finally, I couldn't authorize it alone. Something this big would need approval from Earth Command, probably the Colonial Assembly too. The bureaucracy alone would take months. Then we don't ask for permission, Marcus said. We start with volunteers, people who understand what's coming and are willing to fight. Build the network quietly. Prepare for the worst, hope we're wrong, but plan like we're right. Rodriguez looked at her old friend with a mixture of admiration and concern. You're talking about treason, Marcus. Organizing unauthorized military operations, stealing government resources, probably violating a dozen international treaties. I'm talking about species survival. When the killing starts, nobody's going to care about paperwork. A communication alert interrupted their conversation. The bridge reported an incoming message from the Outer System Patrol. Rodriguez accepted the transmission, and the image of Commander Liu appeared on screen. Admiral, we've got multiple hyperspace signatures incoming. Large ships, unknown configuration. They're not responding to identification requests. Marcus and Rodriguez exchanged grim looks. How many ships? Rodriguez asked. At least 20, Admiral. Maybe more. They're not broadcasting any standard recognition codes, and their energy signatures don't match any known galactic fleet configurations. Time to arrival? 18 hours if they maintain current speed. Rodriguez closed the channel and turned to Marcus. Looks like we're out of time for planning. Whatever's coming, it's here. Marcus stood and headed for the door. Then we better start improvising. I'll take the Prometheus and begin spreading the word to the civilian fleet. If this is the beginning of their campaign, we need every ship and every person ready to fight. Marcus, Rodriguez called after him. What if you're wrong? What if this is just another pirate raid? He paused at the doorway. Then we'll have wasted some time and effort preparing for a war that didn't come. But if I'm right and we do nothing, humanity dies. I know which risk I'd rather take." The incoming fleet materialized at the edge of the Kepler system with a precision that chilled Marcus to the bone. 23 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their sleek black hulls reflecting no light from the system's star. These weren't the patchwork vessels of desperate pirates. They were purpose-built, military ships with advanced stealth technology and firepower that dwarfed the human defense fleet. Marcus watched from the Prometheus as Admiral Rodriguez's small force moved to intercept, knowing they were outgunned 5-1. The lead enemy vessel was massive, easily twice the size of the human flagship Defiance, bristling with weapons that could reduce a planet to rubble. The communication channels crackled as the enemy fleet finally responded to human hails. The voice that emerged was cultured, sophisticated, and utterly alien, yet somehow familiar to Marcus. It spoke in perfect standard Galactic, the diplomatic language used in council chambers. "Human vessels, you are trespassing in territory claimed by the hegemony of unified worlds. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your defiance." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The hegemony was one of the galaxy's major powers, a coalition of ancient civilizations that controlled vast territories in the galactic core. They were council members, supposedly bound by treaties that prohibited unprovoked aggression against younger species. Admiral Rodriguez's response was carefully diplomatic. "This is Admiral Sarah Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Defense Force. The Kepler system is recognized sovereign human territory under Galactic Council Resolution 2847. We request immediate explanation for your unauthorized presence in our space." The alien commander's laughter was like breaking crystal. "Human sovereignty? How amusing. The Council has reviewed your species' territorial claims and found them excessive for a civilization of your limited capabilities. Effective immediately, all human colonies beyond the Sol system are forfeit." The transmission cut off and the enemy fleet began advancing toward the inner system. Marcus activated his ship's emergency broadcast system and began transmitting on all civilian frequencies. "This is Captain Marcus Chen to all ships in the Kepler system. We are under attack by a superior force. Begin immediate evacuation procedures." "This is not a drill." Repeat, "this is not a drill." Across the system, civilian traffic began responding. Cargo haulers changed course toward the outer planets. Mining ships abandoned their operations, and passenger transports started emergency departures. The civilian fleet might not be military, but they knew how to move quickly when survival was at stake. The first exchange of fire between the fleets was brutally one-sided. The enemy ship's weapons punched through human shields like paper, while return fire barely scratched their advanced armor. The cruiser Vengeance died in the first salvo, her hull split open and atmosphere venting into space. Marcus pushed the Prometheus toward the combat zone, not to fight but to coordinate the civilian evacuation. His ship's modified sensors allowed him to track both friendly and enemy movements while staying hidden in the asteroid field that bordered the system. "All civilian vessels, this is Chen," he broadcast. "Form up on the mining platform Alpha 7. We're going to try something these bastards won't expect." Captain Elena Vasquez of the cargo hauler New Horizon responded first. "Marcus, that platform's right in the middle of the combat zone." "Are you insane?" "Probably," Marcus admitted. "But I have an idea that might level the playing field. Trust me, Elena." One by one, civilian ships began converging on the mining platform. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining vessels, even a few personal yachts. Nearly 40 ships total, carrying everything from grain to industrial equipment, to families fleeing the outer colonies. The enemy fleet was systematically destroying the human military vessels, showing tactical skill that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. These weren't raiders or pirates. They were professional military forces with detailed knowledge of human capabilities and weaknesses. As the last human frigate exploded under enemy fire, Admiral Rodriguez's flagship Defiance found itself alone against 22 enemy warships. The enemy commander's voice returned to the communication channels. "Admiral Rodriguez, your resistance has been noted and found wanting. Surrender your vessel, and we will grant your crew the honor of serving the hegemony as laborers. Continue fighting and they will join the void." Rodriguez's response was pure defiance. "This is Earthship Defiance. We do not surrender." We do not submit, and we do not die quietly. The Defiance opened fire with everything she had, her weapons blazing against impossible odds. The enemy ships responded with overwhelming force, but something strange happened. Their shots were slightly off target, as if their targeting systems were being interfered with. Marcus smiled grimly as he watched from the mining platform. The electromagnetic pulse generators hidden throughout the asteroid field were doing their job, creating enough interference to disrupt enemy sensors without affecting human ships designed to work in such environments. All civilian vessels, Marcus broadcast, execute Protocol Omega. The civilian ships scattered like startled birds but not in retreat. Each vessel followed pre-planned routes through the asteroid field, using their superior knowledge of local conditions to stay ahead of enemy targeting. As they moved, they deployed their cargo in carefully calculated patterns. The enemy fleet pursued, confident in their superiority and eager to finish off the surviving humans. They didn't notice the cargo pods being ejected by fleeing vessels, pods that contained mining charges, industrial chemicals, and other materials that seemed harmless to military scanners. Captain Vasquez's voice crackled over the communication system. "Cargo deployed, Marcus. Hope your crazy plan works." "It will," Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "All ships clear the field. 30 seconds. The enemy fleet was deep in the asteroid field now, pursuing what they thought were defenseless civilian vessels. Their formation was spread out to cover more space, exactly as Marcus had hoped. Detonation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The asteroid field erupted in a chain reaction of explosions that turned space itself into a weapon. Mining charges triggered secondary explosions in asteroids rich with metallic compounds. Industrial chemicals created corrosive clouds that ate through ship hulls. Cargo containers filled with ball bearings became massive shotgun blasts at point-blank range. The enemy fleet, caught in the middle of the coordinated destruction, found their advanced technology useless against the raw physics of explosive force and flying debris. Ships that had shrugged off military weapons found themselves crippled by chunks of rock, traveling at orbital velocity. 7 enemy vessels were destroyed outright. 6 more were severely damaged, their hulls breached and systems failing. The remainder of the fleet pulled back, their confidence shaken by an attack they never saw coming. Marcus watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The enemy fleet was still superior in numbers and firepower, but they had learned something important. Humans were dangerous when cornered. The alien commander's voice returned to the communication channels, and for the first time it carried a note of uncertainty. "Impressive, humans. You fight with the cunning of a cornered beast, but this changes nothing. We will adapt and you will still fall." "Maybe," Marcus replied, opening a channel to the entire fleet. "But we'll make you pay for every inch. And while you're busy learning how dangerous cornered beasts can be, remember this. You're not just fighting the ships you can see. You're fighting every human in this system. Every miner who knows these asteroids. Every engineer who built these platforms. Every farmer who's decided their home is worth dying for." The enemy fleet began regrouping, but their formation was more cautious now, their movements more careful. They had expected easy conquest and found determined resistance instead. Admiral Rodriguez's voice cut through the communication chatter. "All surviving vessels, this is Admiral Rodriguez. We're going to make our stand at Kepler Station. Every ship that can fight, every person who won't surrender, this is where we draw the line." As the battered human forces converged on the system's central station, Marcus realized they had accomplished something unexpected. They had survived the first round against impossible odds, and in doing so, they had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 days after the battle in the Kepler system, but not because of human casualties. The Council had received urgent communications from the hegemony of unified worlds, requesting immediate intervention in what they termed a terrorist uprising by human extremists. Ambassador Veltar of the Etherian Collective called the session to order in the great crystalline chamber that housed the Council. Representatives from dozens of civilizations filled the amphitheater, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. What they all shared was a fundamental indifference to human suffering. The Council recognizes Ambassador Kithara of the hegemony, Veltar announced, his luminescent skin pulsing with official authority. Ambassador Kythera rose from her seat, her tall Valorian frame commanding attention. Her silver skin gleamed under the chamber's lights as she addressed the assembly with practiced diplomatic skill. "Honored colleagues," she began, "the hegemony comes before you today to report a grave threat to galactic stability. Human colonial forces have engaged in unprovoked attacks against lawful hegemony operations, using terrorist tactics that violate every principle of civilized warfare." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Several ambassadors activated their translation devices, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The humans deployed improvised explosive devices concealed within civilian cargo, Kythera continued. They used mining equipment as weapons of mass destruction. Most disturbing of all, they coordinated these attacks using civilian vessels filled with non-combatants, effectively using their own people as human shields. The Thulorian representative, a massive creature whose tusks gleamed in the chamber light, spoke without waiting for recognition. "These accusations are serious. Do you have evidence of these tactics?" Kythera activated a holographic display showing the aftermath of the asteroid field battle. The images were carefully edited to show destroyed hegemony ships and debris fields, but omitted any context about the attacking fleet or the civilian evacuation. "As you can see," she said, "sophisticated weapons were used to destroy legitimate military vessels engaged in peaceful territorial adjustment operations. The humans have clearly received advanced military technology from unknown sources, possibly hostile to Council interests." Ambassador Zepthys of the Crystal Spheres, whose translucent form reflected light in prismatic patterns, raised a concern. "The territorial status of the systems in question remains unclear. Were these truly legitimate hegemony operations? The Council has long recognized that human territorial claims exceed their capacity for effective governance," Kythera replied smoothly. "The hegemony was conducting lawful reallocation of underutilized systems to more capable administrators. The human response was terrorism, pure and simple. What none of the Council members knew was that the entire session was being monitored by human intelligence operatives. Dr. Lisa Park, a communications specialist aboard a stealth probe hidden in the system's outer asteroid belt, was recording every word and transmitting it back to the surviving human forces. Marcus listened to the transmission aboard the Prometheus with growing anger. The hegemony was spinning the battle as human aggression against peaceful operations, conveniently omitting their unprovoked attack on sovereign human territory. "They're not just trying to destroy us," he told Admiral Rodriguez over a secure channel. "They're trying to turn the entire galaxy against us, make us look like terrorists and extremists so no one will object when they finish the job." Rodriguez's voice was tight with frustration. "The worst part is, it's working. I'm monitoring Council. Communications. There's already talk of authorizing a peacekeeping operation to deal with the human threat. We're going from victims to villains in a matter of hours." The Council session continued with Ambassador Kythera presenting more carefully edited evidence of human atrocities. She showed images of destroyed hegemony ships, without mentioning they had been attacking civilian evacuees. She displayed recordings of Marcus's tactical communications, without providing context about the defensive nature of the operation. "The humans have clearly embraced a doctrine of asymmetric warfare that threatens the stability of civilized space," she declared. "If allowed to continue, their terrorist tactics could inspire other primitive species to similar extremism. The Council must act decisively to prevent this contagion of violence." The debate that followed revealed the true nature of galactic politics. Several ambassadors expressed concern about human tactics, but none questioned the hegemony's right to claim human territory. The assumption underlying every statement was that humans were inherently inferior, incapable of effective self-governance, and therefore legitimate targets for more advanced civilizations. Dr. Park's voice crackled over the communication system as she reported new developments. "Marcus, you need to hear this. The Etherian ambassador just proposed Resolution 4821, formal authorization for the hegemony to use all necessary force to restore order in human space. The vote is scheduled for tomorrow." Marcus felt his world tilt. If the Council passed that resolution, the hegemony would have legal authority to exterminate every human colony in the galaxy. And based on the Chamber's reaction, it would pass overwhelmingly. "How long until the hegemony reinforcements arrive?" he asked Rodriguez. "Our scouts report a massive fleet mobilizing at their nearest base, at least 50 capital ships, plus escorts. They'll be here within a week to prepare for genocide, with the entire galaxy's blessing." But as Marcus listened to the Council debate, he began to notice something interesting. The ambassadors weren't just discussing human military capabilities, they were worried about them. Several speakers mentioned the unexpected sophistication of human tactics and the concerning effectiveness of improvised weapons. The Thalorian ambassador raised a particularly revealing concern. If humans can destroy hegemony warships with mining equipment and cargo containers, what does this say about our own defensive capabilities? Perhaps we should reconsider the wisdom of aggressive action against a species demonstrating such creativity, Kythera quickly countered. The humans succeeded through surprise and terror tactics. Now that we understand their methods, they pose no significant threat to properly prepared forces. The hegemony has already adapted our procedures to counter their primitive stratagems. But Marcus could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The asteroid field battle had shaken the hegemony's confidence even if they wouldn't admit it publicly. They had expected easy conquest and found determined resistance instead. An idea began, forming in Marcus's mind, dangerous and desperate but possibly their only chance. The galaxy saw humans as weak, primitive, and now terrorist. But what if they used those perceptions as weapons? "Rodriguez," he said suddenly, "I need you to authorize something that's going to sound insane. More insane than turning cargo haulers into torpedo bombers? Much more insane. I want to surrender." The silence on the channel stretched for several seconds. "Marcus, did the radiation from the asteroid field damage your brain? We can't surrender. They'll kill us all." "Not surrender to the hegemony," Marcus clarified. "Surrender to the Galactic Council, publicly, dramatically, with full media coverage. Throw ourselves on their mercy and beg for protection from hegemony aggression. And then? Then we see how the galaxy reacts when they watch the hegemony butcher surrendering civilians on live broadcast. Even the most callous council members might have trouble justifying genocide when it's happening in their own chambers." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about sacrificing whoever goes to make this surrender. The hegemony won't let any human leave that chamber alive." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "But if it saves our colonies, if it exposes the hegemony's true intentions to the galaxy, maybe some good comes from it. And if the galaxy doesn't care? If they just watch us die and move on to other business?" Marcus looked out at the stars, thinking about all the human world scattered across space, all the families and children who deserved a chance to live. "Then at least we'll die with the truth on record. Sometimes that's all you can do." As the council session continued, with Ambassador Kythera painting humans as an existential threat to galactic civilization, Marcus began planning the most dangerous gamble in human history. They were going to surrender publicly and completely, and dare the galaxy to watch them die. The Prometheus arrived at the Galactic Council Station 12 hours before the scheduled vote on Resolution 4821. Marcus had spent the journey preparing for what would likely be his final mission, recording messages for Admiral Rodriguez and writing a testament that laid out everything he had learned about the hegemony's plans. The massive orbital station hung in space like a jeweled crown, its crystalline towers reflecting the light of the system's twin stars. Ships from every major civilization docked at its ports, carrying diplomats, trade representatives, and journalists who covered galactic affairs. What they didn't expect was a lone human cargo hauler requesting emergency diplomatic access. Marcus had gambled that the Council's bureaucratic procedures would work in his favor. No matter how much the galaxy despised humanity, they still followed proper protocols. His request for emergency session time was processed by automated systems that didn't discriminate based on species. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Human requests for council audience were so rare that they generated automatic news alerts across the galactic networks. Within hours, News crews from every major civilization were positioning themselves to cover what many assumed would be humanity's final diplomatic gesture. In the council chamber, Ambassador Kythera watched the developing media circus with growing alarm. She had expected Resolution 4821 to pass quietly, with minimal coverage and no human presence to complicate the narrative. Now she faced the prospect of conducting galactic politics under intense scrutiny. Marcus docked the Prometheus at the station's civilian port and made his way through corridors, filled with beings who regarded him with mixtures of curiosity and contempt. Etherian. Tourists pointed at him like he was an exotic animal, while Valorian security forces watched him with obvious suspicion. The media attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it meant the galaxy would witness whatever happened next. On the other hand, it also meant the hegemony would be watching, probably planning to eliminate him before he could speak. Dr. Park's voice crackled in his earpiece as he approached the chamber. Marcus, we're monitoring 15 different news feeds. You're already the lead story on 7 networks. The Thulorian Global News is calling it the desperate plea of a dying species. Accurate, if not flattering, Marcus replied. Any word on hegemony movements? 3 of their diplomatic security teams just entered the station. They're not bothering to hide their weapons. Marcus had expected as much. The hegemony couldn't risk him exposing their lies in front of the assembled council. They would try to silence him before he could speak, probably making it look like an accident or claiming he was armed and dangerous. The chamber was packed when Marcus entered, every seat filled with representatives eager to witness this unprecedented event. The gallery reserved for media was overflowing, with camera crews jostling for position to record what many expected to be a historic surrender. Ambassador Veltar called the emergency session to order with obvious reluctance. The council recognizes Captain Marcus Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force, who has requested emergency audience time under Diplomatic Protocol 7. Marcus stood in the speaking well, acutely aware that he was probably the first human to address the full council in over a century. The weight of his species' survival rested on what he said next. Honored members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. I come before you not as a military officer, but as a representative of 47 human colonies facing imminent extermination. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Several ambassadors activated their translation devices, while others leaned forward to hear better. 3 days ago, a fleet of hegemony warships entered the Kepler system without warning or provocation. They claimed human territorial rights were void and demanded our immediate surrender. When we attempted to negotiate, they opened fire on civilian evacuation ships. Ambassador Kythera rose from her seat. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The speaker is presenting a distorted version of events already under council review. This emergency session is premature and prejudicial to ongoing deliberations. Veltar's skin pulsed with uncertainty. Captain Chen, the council is aware of recent events in human space. What is the nature of your emergency request? Marcus had prepared for this moment, knowing he would have only minutes before the hegemony found a way to silence him. I formally request council protection for all human civilian populations under Article 12 of the Galactic Protection Protocols. We are a recognized species facing systematic extermination by a council member state. The chamber erupted in shocked conversations. Article 12 was rarely invoked, reserved for cases of genocide or species-level threats. More importantly, it required the council to investigate any formal complaint before authorizing military action. Kythera's response was swift and angry. This is an outrageous abuse of diplomatic procedure. The human colonies are in rebellion against lawful authority. They have no standing to request protection from the consequences of their terrorist actions. Terrorist actions? Marcus turned to face her directly. You mean defending our homes from unprovoked attack? Using mining equipment to protect civilian evacuees? Fighting back when your fleet opened fire on surrendering vessels? You used civilian ships as weapons platforms. You deployed improvised explosives in violation of every civilized standard of warfare. We improvised, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying through the chamber. We used whatever we had because we're not allowed to buy proper weapons from any of you. We turned cargo haulers into warships because you've made sure we have no warships. We fought dirty because when you're facing extinction, clean fighting is a luxury you can't afford. The media gallery was in overdrive, cameras capturing every word of what was becoming the most dramatic council session in decades. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched a lone human stand up to one of the most powerful civilizations in known space. Dr. Park's voice whispered in Marcus's earpiece. Hegemony security teams are moving toward the chamber. You've got maybe 2 minutes before they try to stop this. Marcus pressed on, knowing his time was running out. The hegemony claims we're a threat to galactic stability. But who really threatens stability? The species fighting for survival, or the one that launches unprovoked attacks against civilian populations? Who threatens civilization? The miners turned soldiers, or the empire that disguises genocide as territorial adjustment? Several ambassadors were now taking notes, their attention fully focused on Marcus's words. Even those who despised humanity couldn't ignore the implications of what he was describing. You want to know what humans are capable of? Marcus continued, his voice rising with passion. We're capable of turning asteroids into weapons when our children are threatened. We're capable of flying cargo ships into battle when our homes are burning. We're capable of standing alone against impossible odds because some things are worth dying for. The chamber doors burst open as hegemony security forces entered, their weapons drawn and energy shields activated. Ambassador Kythera was on her feet, shouting orders in her native language. You see? Marcus called out as the guards approached. This is how the hegemony responds to diplomacy. This is how they treat formal requests for council protection. Watch carefully, honored ambassadors, because this is what they plan to do to every human in the galaxy. The guards reached the speaking well, but Veltar's voice stopped them. Halt! This being is under diplomatic protection while addressing the council. Any violence in this chamber will be considered an attack on council sovereignty. The standoff that followed was electric with tension. Hegemony guards with weapons trained on a human diplomat. Council security forces moving to intervene. Media cameras capturing every second for Galactic broadcast. Ambassador Kythera's voice cut through the chaos. The human is armed and dangerous. Our security forces are responding to a legitimate threat. Marcus slowly raised his hands, showing they were empty. I carry no weapons, honored council. I came here with nothing but words and hope for justice. If that makes me dangerous to the hegemony, then perhaps the galaxy should ask why. The moment stretched endlessly, weapons trained and fingers on triggers while the galaxy watched and waited to see how it would end. Finally, Veltar's voice broke the silence. All security forces will stand down immediately. Captain Chen, you have diplomatic immunity until your testimony is complete. The council will hear your full statement. As the guards reluctantly lowered their weapons, Marcus realized he had just won something unprecedented: the galaxy's attention. For the first time in human history, the council was being forced to listen. The galaxy had never seen anything like what followed Marcus's testimony. Within hours of the council session, riots broke out on 17 different worlds as citizens demanded answers about their government's complicity in the planned human genocide. The images of hegemony guards threatening a diplomatic speaker had spread across every communication network, sparking outrage that transcended species boundaries. On the crystal worlds of the Zephyrite Confederation, university students projected holographic displays showing the timeline of hegemony attacks on human colonies. The demonstrations were peaceful but massive, with millions of crystalline beings creating light patterns that could be seen from orbit. The reaction on Thulorian worlds was more direct. Ancient warrior tradition spoke of honor in battle, and the hegemony's attack on civilian evacuees violated every principle the Thulorians held sacred. Massive protests outside hegemony embassies forced their diplomatic staff into protective custody. Even among the typically dispassionate Etherians, there were signs of unprecedented political upheaval. The luminescent beings communicated through patterns of light, and the synchronized displays appearing across their homeworld sent a clear message of disapproval to their government's planned support for Resolution 4821. Dr. Park monitored the galactic communication networks from her hidden observation post, feeding updates to Marcus and Admiral Rodriguez. The information warfare campaign is working better than we hoped, she reported. Public opinion is shifting rapidly. Several minor council members have already withdrawn support for the resolution. But the hegemony wasn't accepting defeat quietly. Ambassador Kythera called an emergency press conference 12 hours after Marcus's testimony. Surrounded by carefully selected evidence and expert witnesses who supported her version of events. The galaxy has been deceived by human propaganda, she declared to assembled media representatives. While Captain Chen spoke of defending homes and protecting children, the reality is far different. We have evidence that human forces use civilian vessels to conduct military operations, deliberately putting non-combatants at risk to generate sympathy. She activated holographic displays showing the same battle footage from different angles, this time emphasizing human ships launching attacks from within civilian evacuation convoys. The images were technically accurate but stripped of context. They showed human tactics without explaining the desperate circumstances that drove them. Furthermore, Kithara continued, we have discovered evidence that human colonies have been developing weapons technology in violation of galactic non-proliferation agreements. The sophisticated explosive devices used in their terrorist attacks could not have been created with their declared industrial capabilities. This was a cleverer line of attack, and Marcus knew it. The hegemony was implying that humans had received advanced weapons from unknown sources, possibly hostile to Council interests. It transformed the narrative from David versus Goliath into a story about human duplicity and hidden agendas. The accusations gained traction in Council circles, where paranoia about unknown threats was always present. Several ambassadors who had been swayed by Marcus's testimony began expressing doubts about human motivations and capabilities. Marcus watched the press conference from his temporary quarters on the Council station, knowing that his diplomatic immunity wouldn't protect him much longer. The hegemony was building a case for his detention as a security threat, and the political momentum was shifting in their favor. We need something bigger, he told Admiral Rodriguez over their encrypted channel. The hegemony is too skilled at information warfare. They're turning our victories into defeats, making our survival tactics look like aggression. What did you have in mind? Rodriguez asked. I want to invite the entire Council to witness our surrender, not just our diplomatic surrender, our complete military capitulation. Show them exactly what the hegemony is fighting so hard to achieve. The idea was audacious beyond measure. Marcus was proposing to broadcast humanity's final defeat live to the entire galaxy, turning their extinction into a media event that no one could ignore or rationalize away. Marcus, that's suicide. Once we surrender completely, the hegemony will move in and finish the job. There won't be any coming back from that. Unless, Marcus said quietly, we make sure the galaxy sees exactly what finishing the job means. Let them watch the hegemony exterminate surrendering civilians on live broadcast. Make it impossible for anyone to claim they didn't know what was happening. The plan that emerged was desperate and brilliant in equal measure. Human forces would publicly surrender all military assets and withdraw to designated civilian areas on their colony worlds. They would invite Council observers and media representatives to witness their complete compliance with hegemony demands. When the hegemony inevitably moved to eliminate the defenseless human populations anyway, the galaxy would see the true nature of their territorial adjustment operations. But the plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. Too early, and the hegemony might actually accept the surrender and rule over human populations as slaves rather than exterminating them. Too late, and the massacre would happen without witnesses. Dr. Park began reaching out to media contacts across the galaxy, using carefully worded invitations that emphasized the historic nature of humanity's surrender, without revealing the full strategy. Within hours, representatives from every major news network were requesting permission to cover the event. The hegemony found themselves trapped by their own propaganda. Having spent days claiming that human military resistance was the only obstacle to peaceful resolution, they couldn't object to Council observers witnessing the surrender without appearing unreasonable. Ambassador Kithara agreed to the arrangement with obvious reluctance, knowing she was walking into a trap, but unable to see a way around it. The hegemony welcomes neutral observation of our humanitarian operations, she announced. We have nothing to hide from the galactic community. As news of the planned surrender spread across human space, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Families gathered around communication screens to say goodbye to loved ones on distant worlds. Colony administrators began destroying sensitive records and equipment that couldn't be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Admiral Rodriguez's final message to the fleet was, broadcast on all human frequencies, knowing it would be intercepted and recorded by every intelligence service in the galaxy. To all human forces, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. We have fought with honor against impossible odds. We have shown the galaxy that humanity will not accept extinction quietly. Now we face our final test, the courage to die with dignity while the universe watches. The surrender was scheduled for 72 hours later, giving the media time to position themselves and the council time to deploy observers. As the deadline approached, Marcus prepared for the most important performance of his life. He would stand before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization and formally surrender his species to their executioners. And in doing so, he would force the galaxy to choose between complicity and conscience. The question that haunted him was simple. When faced with genocide broadcast live to billions of viewers, would the galaxy finally find the courage to act? As the final hours counted down, Marcus realized that everything, human survival, galactic justice, and the future of civilization itself, would depend on the answer to that question. The stage was set for humanity's last stand, and this time, the entire galaxy would be watching. The surrender ceremony took place on New Geneva, the largest human agricultural world in the Kepler system. The planet's capital city had been transformed into a vast amphitheater of defeat, with human civilians gathered in designated areas, while hegemony forces surrounded them. Council observers and media representatives positioned themselves to capture every moment of what many expected to be humanity's final chapter. Marcus stood on the steps of the Colonial Administration Building, wearing his formal dress uniform for what would likely be the last time. Behind him, Admiral Rodriguez and the surviving human military commanders waited in formation, while 10,000 colonists filled the central plaza. The hegemony fleet commander, Admiral Zaxtor, had come down from orbit to personally accept the surrender. His silver skin gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as he reviewed the terms that would effectively end human independence forever. "By the authority vested in me by the Hegemony Council," he announced, his voice carrying across the plaza through amplification systems, "I hereby accept the unconditional surrender of all human military forces and the cession of all territorial claims beyond the Sol system." Cameras from 17 different news networks recorded every word as Marcus stepped forward with the formal surrender documents. The papers were symbolic. The real surrender was happening across dozens of worlds as human forces laid down their weapons and accepted hegemony occupation. On behalf of the Human Colonial Defense Force, Marcus said clearly, "I surrender all military assets and renounce all territorial claims in accordance with hegemony demands. We place ourselves under the protection of the Galactic Council and request humanitarian oversight of all subsequent operations." The last sentence was crucial, formally invoking Council responsibility for whatever happened next. Every representative present was now legally obligated to witness and report on hegemony actions. Admiral Zaxtor accepted the documents with obvious satisfaction. "The hegemony acknowledges your surrender and assumes full administrative authority over all former human territories. Effective immediately, all human populations will be relocated to designated processing centers for integration into hegemony society." The euphemism fooled no one. Processing centers was diplomatic language for extermination camps, and the media representatives knew it. Across the galaxy, news anchors began explaining to their audiences what they were about to witness. But something unexpected happened as hegemony forces began moving to implement the relocation orders. The human colonists didn't resist or panic as anticipated. Instead, they stood quietly in family groups, holding hands and singing softly in their native languages. The songs were hymns, lullabies, folk ballads, the musical heritage of a species facing extinction. The melodies rose and fell across the plaza like a gentle wind, creating an atmosphere of dignity and sorrow that touched even hardened military personnel. Council observer Timel Dar, representing the crystalline hierarchies, found himself unexpectedly moved by the display. In his 1,000-year lifetime, he had witnessed the conquest of dozens of worlds, but never anything like this peaceful acceptance of fate. The hegemony forces had expected resistance, panic, or at least the chaos that usually accompanied military occupation. What they found instead was a people who had chosen to die with grace rather than live as slaves to Admiral Zaxtor's. Discomfort was visible as he gave orders for the first group of humans to be loaded onto transport ships. The careful choreography of genocide was being disrupted by its victims' refusal to cooperate with their own Dehumanization. As the loading began, something remarkable happened. Dr. Sarah Kim, a xenobiologist from the New Geneva Research Institute, stepped forward from the crowd of civilians. "Admiral," she said in a clear voice that carried across the plaza, "I have information about human agricultural techniques that might be valuable to the hegemony. May I speak with your science officers before we're processed?" It was a simple request, but it forced Zaxtor to acknowledge what everyone knew was about to happen. If he agreed to the meeting, he was admitting the humans possessed knowledge worth preserving. If he refused, he was confirming that processing meant extermination. "There is no need for such meetings," he replied stiffly. "The hegemony has adequate agricultural knowledge." Dr. Kim nodded sadly. "I understand. Then I suppose the terraforming techniques we developed for marginal worlds will die with us. The drought-resistant grain variants, the atmospheric processors that can work in zero-oxygen environments, the techniques for making dead worlds bloom, all lost." She spoke loudly enough for the media to record every word, and her colleagues began adding their own contributions to the list of knowledge that would vanish with humanity. "The quantum resonance patterns we discovered in hyperspace navigation," called out Dr. Martinez, a physicist from the university, "the medical treatments we developed for cross-species compatibility," added Dr. Patel from the hospital, "the asteroid mining techniques that tripled efficiency in the outer systems," contributed Engineer Thompson. One by one, humans began cataloging their contributions to galactic civilization, creating a roll call of knowledge and innovation that would be lost forever. The media representatives frantically recorded everything, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Admiral Zaxtor tried to restore order by accelerating the loading process, but the damage was done. The galaxy was watching the systematic destruction of a civilization that had clearly contributed more than anyone had realized. The breaking point came when 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, Admiral Rodriguez's granddaughter, broke away from her family group and approached the hegemony commander. "Sir," she said in the clear voice that only children possess, "my grandmother says you're going to kill us all. Is that true?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Every camera was focused on the massive alien commander and the small human child standing before him. Across the galaxy, billions of beings waited for his answer. Zaxtor stared down at the child, his silver features reflecting confusion and growing discomfort. This wasn't how genocide was supposed to work. The victims weren't supposed to ask direct questions that forced you to acknowledge what you were doing. You are being relocated for your own safety," he said finally, the words sounding hollow even to him. "My grandmother says that's not true," Emma replied with childlike directness. "She says you're going to hurt us because we're different, but we don't want to hurt anybody. We just want to go home." The plaza had fallen completely silent except for the humming of recording equipment. Even the hegemony soldiers seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. It was Council Observer Timildar who finally spoke, his crystalline voice ringing with authority that transcended species. "Admiral Zaxtor, I invoke Article 9 of the Galactic Protection Protocols. As a formal Council Observer, I demand immediate clarification of your operational parameters regarding non-combatant populations." The legal challenge was perfect in its timing and implications. Article 9 required military commanders to justify their actions regarding civilians when questioned by council representatives. Zaxtor was being forced to either admit his genocide or lie under oath to a council observer. The operational parameters are classified under hegemony security protocols," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No classification can supersede council oversight authority during formal observation," Timildar replied. "I repeat my demand for clarification." The standoff that followed was broadcast live to every inhabited world in the galaxy. A hegemony admiral, surrounded by overwhelming military force, unable to answer a simple question about his intentions regarding a defenseless human child. In that moment, the galaxy finally understood what Marcus had been trying to tell them. The hegemony's territorial adjustment was genocide, pure and simple. The evidence was right there in their silence, their discomfort, their inability to justify their actions when confronted with the innocent question of a child. What happened next would be debated by historians for centuries to come. Admiral Zaxtor, faced with the choice between committing genocide on live broadcast or admitting his true intentions, chose a third option. He ordered his forces to withdraw. The hegemony requires additional time to review operational procedures, he announced stiffly. All relocation activities are hereby suspended pending further authorization. As hegemony ships lifted off from New Geneva, leaving behind confused soldiers and bewildered civilians, Marcus realized they had achieved something impossible. They had forced one of the galaxy's major powers to back down through nothing more than moral pressure and media scrutiny. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The hegemony would regroup, find new strategies, and return with methods less vulnerable to public scrutiny. The galaxy had awakened to the reality of human worth, but whether that awakening would translate into lasting protection remained to be seen. Standing in the plaza as families reunited and children played where bodies were supposed to lie, Marcus understood that humanity had won something precious: time. Time to prepare, time to build alliances, time to prove that the ugly but deadly galactic lion was far from finished fighting.